Shalom Avracha. I don't know if it's to say we're gathered here. This year is unique. A lot of yasher koach to the people that organized this. It was very challenging, and hopefully we'll get our inspiration even from this kind of very, very unusual type of getting together. I'm going to speak about somewhat of an unusual topic. I guess it's something that's relevant because of the heavy political atmosphere, but I want to speak about it from a unique political point of view. From a unique Torah point of view. The elections, the events have been very, very polarizing, and everyone has chosen sides. Right, left, conservative, liberal, Democrat, Republican. None of that is Torah. There are things that are compatible. There are things that are important to us. We have to make decisions, but we have our own shita, our own Torah, our own approaches. In some areas, they might have seen the light. In some areas, not. And therefore, I would like to speak specifically about some of the areas where actually the quote-unquote so-called left might actually be closer to our hashkafa. And I want to make it clear again. I endorse no party because I think no party and nobody out there is a Torah person. But some of the ideas I think are important to emphasize, Torah ideas, even if they belong to the right or wrong party. I'm going to pick 3 points especially. 1 point, the idea of government regulation, right or wrong. The so-called right believes the government should stay out of people's hair. They should regulate as little or not at all, depending on where you are on the spectrum. And the so-called left believes more and more government regulations. Is there a Torah perspective in that? 2, people who don't have money, what is the responsibility of society to them? Do we have responsibility? Should the government be involved in it? 3, when we're dealing with different bad midos, different averos, which are the worst? There are many, many immoralities that the Torah really, really, in very, very strong terms, denounces and tells us what the punishment is. So we're to ask ourselves, what is the worst of them all? What is it? Once again, it's difficult to translate these ideas because is a U.S. government similar to a Jewish government in Klal Yisrael, Batei Dinim? I'm not making an easy cut and paste. We're going to go through some Torah ideas, and it will give us some perspective on what things ought to look like. Whether this is what the U.S. government ought to do, whether they're capable of doing it, whether the best vehicle for doing it, that's ask your local Orthodox politician. I can only give you somewhat of a Torah approach. First thing, government regulation. Is there a point to it? Is it right? Is it appropriate? I am going to be quoting from the Rambam in Hilchos Mechira, Perek Yud Dalet. The Rambam, as you all probably know, does not really say anything of his own. This is a simply laid out, extremely logical presentation of what is the bottom line psak in the Gemara. So the Rambam says, he starts with Perek Yud Dalet, and he says, it is true that you cannot fool people as far as the prices of items goes. You cannot sell something that's worth $10 for $20. That actually cancels the sale. So, but if you notify and you tell a person, I am a boutique shop. A chocolate bar that you can get for 50 cents at your local CVS is going to cost $8.93 because I smile sweetly at you and I don't call it chocolate, I call it something else. That's perfectly legitimate. As long as it's clear that I'm charging a price beyond what you could be gotten for, that's not cheating and that's perfectly acceptable. I can charge any price that I would like so long as you're aware that this may be far from the best price you can get. That sounds quite liberal and open. Avol, Bezdin chayavim lifsok hash'orim ulehamed shotrin. Bezdin has to get enforcement. They have to create a price list and guards to make sure that people not make a profit as they wish, and there's a certain norm. It's in those days 15% above and beyond expense, obviously. However, things that are absolutely necessities. Yenos, wine in those days was a necessity. Shmanim, Vesaltos, oil, flour, and so on. But other items, luxury items, koish and lavona, you can do as much as you want. So the first thing is regulation is mandated on items that are necessary. So the government does need to make sure that items are not priced out of the range of affordability, but they also need to make sure that that's only in items that are necessary. We don't have to make everything affordable to everybody. There's no reason for it. So yes, that people have necessities, regulations are in place. Obviously, you can't force people to charge less and not make a profit, but a modest profit is a maximum you can make on items that are necessary. Next, you cannot hoard things that are necessities. As if somebody has a monopoly and he hoards all the oil or flour, and then the price goes through the roof because of hoarding, you can and should make laws and have to make laws to stop hoarding. And actually, one of the brachos Shemanesh is a curse for people who hoard crops and thereby raise the prices. So the idea of an artificially inflated price, meaning there is enough to go around, but one person is keeping a lock and key so that the price goes up, that is absolutely prohibited and it should be enforced. Next, and once again, we make a distinction between necessities and luxuries. One more. Tess. Rashoyim b'nei ha'ir lokutz lem shar l'chol dover sheyirtzu v'afil lebasa or lelechem. The city people, the people in the city can make a price list for anything, or lahasnos b'neihem ki misha yavo yansha zakach v'kach, and create a system of punishments. They are entitled. So you have a kehillah, and they decide that this has to be the price, and somebody veers from it, they can punish him. V'chein, he says, Rashoyim anshe umnitz lifsok b'neim shelo yasa echad b'yom she'asa chaver k'yoseh b'zeh. Guilds can regulate work in a way that they give each person a fair share. So on Mondays you have to hire this person, on Tuesdays this person, on Wednesdays this person. They can do that, and they can enforce those rules, and even penalizing heavy monetary penalties. So the first thing we see is the power of regulation on a communal level exists. When there was a monarchy in Israel, his power was absolute. On a communal level, obviously we have not nowhere near the type of power a monarch had, but we have the power and the right to create regulations. One, to regulate the work so that there's a fair distribution, that people don't have to work 6 days a week, that by alternating, we're able to give people a day off. They're able to regulate unfair competition. They are mandated to regulate goods in a way that people have basic necessities at affordable prices. And they also can enact regulation that there's no artificial pumping up of prices by somebody simply hoarding everything, which is, in a sense, what a monopoly does and why a monopoly creates a danger to a free economy. So in the area of economic regulation, there are very clear categories of regulation that are appropriate and mandated. That's one. What is the responsibility of a community to people that don't have money? Now, everybody feels charity is wonderful, but it's personal. Every person has a personal mitzvah to give tzedakah. So no one disagrees with that, but does the community as a community have that? Let's take a look at the Rambam. In Hilchos Matnos Aniyim, the 9th chapter. Aleph, Kol ir sheyesh ba Yisrael, chayovim lahamid mem gaboy tzedakah. Every city in Klal Yisrael must have appointed official for tzedakah. Anoshim yiduim v'nemanim, people that are recognized as being honest. Shu mechazim ala omer Shabbos al Shabbos. They go around once a week and collect from them money for it. And there's how much you need to give to each poor person. You need to give him a week's worth of food. And then he says there's also a daily collection. Gimel, the Rambam says, Me'olam lo ra'ino v'lo shamanu b'kohol miYisrael she'en lem kupet tzedakah. We've never heard or seen a Jewish community that did not have a tzedakah fund. Every single community has a tzedakah fund. And this actually can, this is something that you can enforce. Tzedakah is one of the things you can force people to give tzedakah. Now, the Rambam is also points out in very, very powerful terms the shortcomings of a community that's very frum but not giving. Betinios mechalkim zonos laniyim. On a fast day, you give food to poor people so that they can eat before, they can eat afterwards. V'chol tainis she'ochlam v'lonu v'lo chilku tzedakah laniyim. A fast day where everybody ate and went to sleep without giving tzedakah to poor people. Harei elu kishov chidomim. They are murderers. V'leim ne'amar b'Kabbalah. And the Navi says about them, tzedek yolimba v'atem meratzchim. It used to be a place of justice, and now it's murderers. And he goes on to explain how it's collected. So the obligation of the community to feed the people that are poor exists. If we ask ourselves, does a community, a society, have an obligation to feed its poor? The answer is yes. Now, technically, does this apply to a non-Jew? In other words, a non-Jewish community, do they have an obligation? I don't know. But it's certainly when we speak of Torah values, it is a Torah value that we take care of people that don't have what to eat. Now, arguments can be made that a Jewish community is a wonderfully efficient instrument. The U.S. government is not an efficient instrument. Again, ask your local Orthodox politician. But if we're talking about perspective, what is the obligation of society To individuals that don't have, the answer is absolute. And the way the Rambam says, we've never heard of a Jewish community that doesn't have that tzedakah. That's the perspective of obligation of society towards individual in terms of having a meal and so on. One more point which incorporates this and then gives us a sweeping perspective on relative merits and values of what makes a society rise and fall. Sodom is probably considered the ultimate evil society. Amalek is the ultimate evil nation. Of the three, let's call it societies or mega societies that suffered doom, we have the Mabul, that was the flood. We have the Dor HaPlaga, which was the generation that fell apart, and to the Tower of Babel, and we have the stone. Anyone familiar with the various medrashim, the psukim in the prophets that want to give a paradigm of an evil society, kistom hayinu kamor daminu. Stone is it. Stone is the worst a society can be, and it was obliterated with total incineration. If it's hard to pick, but if we to ask ourselves, what is the worst of the worst in stone? We have many chazal. The psukim themselves speak of terrible moral depravity. The word sodomy comes from the word stone, because the psukim speak about that, and terrible tortures inflicted, many bad things. It was a society that was thoroughly bad and evil. But what was the point that triggered that destruction? So we're going to learn Rabbeinu Bechaya. Rabbeinu Bechaya is one of the most important early commentaries on Chumash. I would say second only to the Ramban and Ibn Ezra. The Rabbeinu Bechaya is one of the fundamental pirushim on Torah, and this is by stone. He says, they had everything bad, and he brings the Chazal about all the various psukim. It says Anshe Stoma Roim Chatoyim. It says there was Birchas Hashem. They cursed God. It says Me'ozesh Shvichas Damim. They spilled blood, and so on. So there was no lack of bad or evil that the people of Stone did. Avol, the Rabbeinu Bechaya says, Nigmar Dinam. Why? What was the final, what they call in Hebrew, the Makkah Bepatish, the final bad that sealed their doom? What was that? They despised giving tzedakah. And they did not care about the poor people and their fellow countrymen that were hungry, that were poor. So Rabbeinu Bechaya says, it's not the bad they did, it's the fact that they had a lack of any type of feeling and sentiment towards poor people. There's somebody in our neighborhood who's very involved in stock, is a wonderful person. He once told over the following story. His mother used to be in charge of the March of Dimes chapter, the local March of Dimes chapter, and part of that was to go around collect from people money. Now the March of Dimes used to help children with cerebral palsy. It was kind of, when I was growing up, that was a charity, and he would knock on people's doors and we get excuses. People gave already and so on. Typical. That's fine. One person answered during, and he explained to him what he's collecting for. He says, "Oh, it's charity." He says, "I don't do charity." He said, "No, it's legitimate." And they said, "No, I know it's legitimate. I have no problems with it. I just don't do charity." And this fellow said he didn't know how to respond to it. As a Jew, he grew up with the idea that you do charity. So fine, we all find little rationalizations how to, lighten the burden. But the idea of charity is axiomatic to us. And this person grew up without it. So he says, they despised charity. We're self-made people. And if you can't make it yourself, tough luck. They did not care about the poor people or fellow countrymen who were laying starving. And then he says, and because this was constant, it wasn't a deviation once or twice. This is who they were. That was the reason why they were obliterated from the face of the earth. And he says, there's not a nation in the world that people aren't charitable to each other. The people in Stone despised charity and were hard-hearted to the ultimate. There was no Torah given, no prophets told him to give it. There was no, where was the messenger of God? The prophet told him to do it. He says, Hine hat staka min a mitzvah samuskolos. Staka is a mitzvah that should be axiomatic. It should be something that the human mind should accept as a given. V'dova mituavhu. It is a disgusting thing. Sheyira adam esmino mutal berav. That a person could look around and see a fellow human being starving. V'hu asher v'saveh mikol tov. And he's wealthy, and he has plenty, and his stomach is full. Ve'na mirachel achas nafsho. And there's no mercy on his part, no sentiment to try to help this person. Al achas kama v'kama al mishumu masay. Certainly is a fellow countryman. V'dorim achas, and somebody, a fellow city dweller. Val kain avdon Hashem yisparach anshe stom. That's why Hashem destroyed the people of Stone who stopped charity. V'lokach nikmas haniyim, and he took revenge on behalf of the poor people. So Rabbeinu Bechaya says the fact that they were cursed God, atheists of some sort, terrible, not the reason to be destroyed totally. The fact that they were depraved and did some of the worst arayas, terrible, not a reason to obliterate. Not even killing people. People kill people in a passion, goes that. But the lack of any type of rachamim, the lack of compassion, means that you're just not wired like a human being. You're missing something. So compassion, the idea that society needs to care for the people that are starving, sick, hungry, is the most fundamental midah that a human society exists on. And without that, it does not justify its existence. Once again, what's the best way to do it? How to do it? That's not what we're talking about. But the idea that we are responsible, and that's universal. It's not only Jewish. This is universal, that a society is responsible for the hungry, for the sick, for the wretched, whether it's their fault, not their fault. We have a responsibility, and we can't shake it off. That is the Rabbeinu Bechaya here. So let's just review the points. And again, I'm making these points so that we understand what our perspective is. How to implement it, who are the best people to implement it, and so on. That's not the area that I'm into. But let's never lose our true Torah Hashkafa. One, society has responsibilities towards the individual. One responsibility is that to regulate and to govern prices in a way that allows people to live. It's not everybody needs to have everything. There's a clear distinction between the luxuries that if HaKadosh Baruch Hu bless you with it, that's fine, and basic needs that people should be able to afford at a reasonable price. A society is allowed to and mandated to regulate it. 2, we put in regulations for a good working for society so that people who are working, we can, through regulation, allow people to have their days of work and so on. Those are all positive. Next, we have an obligation to set up a communal tzedakah. It's not people's personal goodwill, it's also that. But every society, every kehillah is required to have a tzedakah fund that has the power actually to collect money, whether the person wants to or not, kofen al tzedakahs. And the Rambam says it is unheard of in Klal Yisrael that we had a community that communally did not care tzedakah. And finally, we have the incredible words of Rebbe Chaya. There are many terrible averos, and averos carry punishments. But all averos, I can look at the person as being a human being who's wrong, who's made a mistake, who's gone off, who's doing something terrible, who has a flaw. But the only avera that I could say the person is not a human being, he's missing a core value that makes him human, is compassion. And a society like Stone that did not have the feeling of compassion towards the poor and the starving does not merit to exist. They are not humans and they cannot exist in society. HaKadosh Baruch Hu should help that speedily we recreate our society, Klal Yisrael society, with our king, Mashiach Tzidkenu, and our legislature, the Sanhedrin. And we run a society that's built on principles of tzedakah and mishpat. Melech ohev tzedakah mishpat. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, what HaKadosh Baruch Hu likes is the intertwining, where society is a society of law and order and compassion and care. And that, a society of Ohev Tzedakah Mishpat, will be an Or LaGoyim and illuminate the world entirely. Thank you.